When April with the showers sweet with fruit, the drought of March is pierced unto the root, and bathed each vein with liquor that has power to generate therein and sire the flower, when Zephyr also has with his sweet breath quickened again in every holt and heft the tender shoots and buds as the young sun into the ram one half his course has run, and many little birds make melody that sleep through all the night with one eye, so nature pricks them on to ramp and rage. Then do folks long to go on pilgrimage, and palmers do go seeking out strange strands to distant shrines well known in sundry lands, and specially from every shire's end of England they to Canterbury wend, the holy blessed martyr there to seek, who helped them when they lay so ill and weak. Befell that in that season, on a day, in Southwark at the tabard as I lay, ready to start upon my pilgrimage to Canterbury, full of devout homage, there came at nightfall to that hostelry some 29 in a company of sundry persons who had chanced to fall in fellowship, and pilgrims were they all, that toward Canterbury town would ride. The rooms and stables spacious were and wide, and well we there were eased and of the best. And briefly, when the sun had gone to rest, so had I spoken with them every one, that I was of their fellowship anon, and made agreement that we'd early rise to take the road as you I will apprise. But none the less, whilst I have time and space, before yet farther in this tale I pace, it seems to me accordant with reason to inform you of the state of every one of all of these as it appeared to me, and who they were, and what was their degree, and even how arrayed there at the inn. And with the knight thus will I first begin. A knight there was, and he a worthy man, who, from the moment that he first began to ride about the world, loved chivalry, truth, honor, freedom, and all courtesy. Full worthy was he in his liege lord's war, and therein had he ridden none more far, as well in Christendom as heathenesse, and honored everywhere for worthiness. At Alexandria he, when it was won, full oft the tables rostered he'd begun, above all nations, knights in Prussia, in Latvia rated he, and Russia, no christened man so oft of his degree. In far Granada at the siege was he, of Algeciras and in Belmarie, at Ayas was he, and at Satali, when they were won, and on the middle sea, at many a noble meeting chanced to be. Of mortal battles he had fought 15, and he'd fought for a faith at Tremesine, 3 times in lists, and each time slain his foe. This self-same worthy knight had been also at one time with the Lord at Palatai, against another heathen in Turkey, and always won he sovereign fame for prize. Though so illustrious, he was very wise, and bore himself as meekly as a maid. He never yet had any vileness said, in all his life to whatsoever wight. He was a truly perfect and gentle knight. But now to tell you all of his array, his steeds were good, but yet he was not gay. Of simple fustian wore he a japon, sadly discolored by his habergeon, for he had lately come from his voyage, and now was going on this pilgrimage. With him there was his son, a youthful squire, a lover and a lusty bachelor, with locks well curled as if they'd laid in press. Some 20 years of age he was, I guess. In stature he was of an average length, wondrously active eye, and great of strength. He'd ridden some time with the cavalry in Flanders, in Artois, and Picardy, and borne him well within that little space, in hope to win thereby his lady's grace. Prinked out he was, as if he were a med, all full of fresh-cut flowers, white and red. Singing he was, or fluting all the day. He was as fresh as is the month of May. Short was his gown, with sleeves both long and wide. Well could be sit on horse and fairly ride. He could make songs and words thereto indite, joust and dance too, as well as sketch and write. So hot he loved that, while night told her tale, he slept no more than does a nightingale. Courteous he and humble, willing and able, and carved before his father at the table. A yeoman had he, nor more servants, no, at that time, for he chose to travel so. And he was clad in coat of hood and green, a sheaf of peacock arrows bright and keen, under his belt he bore right carefully. Well could he keep his tackle yeomanly, his arrows had no draggled feathers low, and in his hand he bore a mighty bow. A cropped head had he, and sun-brown face, of woodcraft knew he all the useful ways. Upon his arm he bore a bracer gay, and at one side a sword and buckler, yea, and at the other side a dagger bright, well sheathed and sharp as spear point in the light. On breast a Christopher of silver sheen, he bore a horn in baldric all of green. A forester he truly was, I guess. There was also a nun, a prioress, who in her smiling modest was and coy. Her greatest oath was but by Saint Aloy, and she was known as Madame Eglantine. Full well she sang the services divine, intoning through her nose becomingly, and fair she spoke her French, and fluently, after the school of Stratford at the Bow, for French of Paris was not hers to know. At table she had been well taught withal, and never from her lips let morsels fall, nor dipped her fingers deep in sauce, but ate with so much care the food upon her plate, that never driblet fell upon her breast. In courtesy she had delight and zest. Her upper lip was always wiped so clean, that in her cup was no iota seen of grease when she had drunk her draught of wine. Becomingly she reached for meat to dine, and certainly delighting in good sport. She was right pleasant, amiable, in short. She was at pains to counterfeit the look of courtliness, and stately manners took, and would be held worthy of reverence. But to say something of her moral sense, she was so charitable and piteous that she would weep if she but saw a mouse caught in a trap, though it were dead or bled. She had some little dogs too that she fed on roasted flesh or milk and fine white bread. But sore she'd weep if one of them were dead, or if men smote it with a rod to smart, for pity ruled her and her tender heart. Right decorous her pleated wimple was, her nose was fine, her eyes were blue as glass, her mouth was small, and therewith soft and red, but certainly she had a fair forehead. It was almost a full span broad, I own, for, truth to tell, she was not undergrown. Neat was her cloak, as I was well aware, of coral small about her arm she'd bear a string of beads, and gauded all with green, and therefrom hung a brooch of golden sheen, whereon there was first written a crowned A, and under Amor vincit omnia. Another little nun with her had she, who was her chaplain, and of priests she'd 3. Among there was one made for mastery, an outrider who loved his venery, a manly man to be an abbot able. Full many a blooded horse had he in stable, and when he rode men might his bridle hear, a jingling in the whistling wind as clear, aye, and as loud as does the chapel bell, where this brave monk was of the cell. The rule of Maurice or Saint Benedict, by reason it was old and somewhat strict, this said monk let not holy men, nor that a monk, when he is cloisterless, is like unto a fish that's waterless. That is to say, a monk out of his cloister. But this same text he held not worth an oyster, and I said his opinion was right good. What? Should he study as a madman would, upon a book in cloister cell, or yet go labor with his hands, and swink and sweat, as Austin bids? How shall the world be served? Let Austin have his toil to him reserved. Therefore he was a rider day and night. Greyhounds he had, as swift as bird in flight. Since riding and the hunting of the hare were all his love, for no cost would he spare. I saw his sleeves were pure fled at the hand, with fur of grey, the finest in the land. Also, to fasten hood beneath his chin, he had a good wrought gold, a curious pin. A love knot in the larger end there was. His head was bald and shone like any glass, and smooth as one anointed was his face. Fat was this lord, he stood in goodly case. His bulging eyes he rolled about, and hot they gleamed and red, like fire beneath a pot. His boots were soft, his horse of great estate. Now certainly he was a fine prelate. He was not pale as some poor wasted ghost. A fat swan loved he best of any roast. His palfrey was as brown as is a berry. A friar there was, a wanton and a merry, a limiter, a very festive man. In all the orders four is none that can equal his gossip and his fair language. He had arranged full many a marriage of women young, and this at his own cost. Unto his order he was a noble post. Well liked by all, and intimate was he with franklins everywhere in his country, and with the worthy women of the town, for at confessing he'd more power in gown, as he himself said, than a good curate, for of his order he was licentiate. He heard confession gently, it was said, gently absolved too, leaving naught of dread. He was an easy man to give penance, for knowing he should gain a good pittance. For to a begging friar money given, in sign that any man has been well shriven. For if one gave, he dared to boast of this, he took the man's repentance not amiss. For many a man there is so hard of heart, he cannot weep whoever pains may smart. Therefore, instead of weeping and of prayer, men should give silver to poor friars all bare. His tippet was stuck always full of knives, and pins to give to young and pleasing wives. And certainly he kept a merry note, well could he sing and play upon the rote. At balladry he bore the prizes away. His throat was white as lily of the May, yet strong he was as ever champion. In towns he knew the taverns, every one, and every good host and each barmaid too. Better than begging lepers, these he knew, for under no such solid man as he accorded it, as far as he could see, to have sick lepers for acquaintances. There is no honest advantageousness in dealing with such poverty-stricken curs. It's with the rich and with big victuallers, and so, wherever profit might arise, courteous he was, and humble in men's eyes. There was no other man so virtuous. He was the finest beggar of his house, a certain district being farm to him. None of his brethren dared approach its rim, for though a widow had no shoes to show, so pleasant was his in principio. He always got a farthing ere he went. He lived by pickings, it is evident, as he could romp as well as any whelp. On love days could he be of mickle help, for there he was not like a cloisterer, with threadbare cope as is the poor scholar, but he was like a lord or like a pope. Of double worsted was his semi-cope, that rounded like a bell, as you may guess. fastened rather elegantly. He spoke his notion outright pompously, stressing the times when he had won, not lost. He would the sea were held at any cost. Across from Middleborough to Orwell town, at money changing he could make a crown. This worthy man kept all his wits well set. There was no one could say he was in debt. So well he governed all his trade affairs, with bargains and with borrowings and with shares. Indeed, he was a worthy man withal, but, sooth to say, his name I can't recall. A clerk from Oxford was with us also, who turned to getting knowledge long ago. As meagre was his horse as is a rake, nor he himself too fat, I'll undertake. But he looked hollow and went soberly. Right threadbare was his overcoat, for he had got him yet no churchly benefice, nor was so worldly as to gain office. For he would rather have at his bed's head some 20 books, all bound in black and red, of Aristotle and his philosophy, than rich robes, fiddle, or gay psaltery. Yet, and for all he was philosopher, he had but little gold within his coffer. But all that he might borrow from a friend on books and learning he would swiftly spend, and there he'd pray right busily for the souls of those who gave him wherewithal for schools. Of study took he utmost care and heed, not one word spoke he more than was his need, and that was said in fullest reverence, and short and quick and full of high good sense. Pregnant of moral virtue was his speech, and gladly would he learn and gladly teach. A sergeant of the law, wary and wise, who'd often gone to Paul's walk to advise. There was also compact of excellence, discreet he was, and of great reverence. At least he seemed so. His words were so wise. Often he sat as justice in assize, by patent or commission from the crown, because of learning and his high renown. He took large fees, and many robes could own. So great a purchaser was never known. All was fee simple to him in effect, wherefore his claims could never be suspect. Nowhere a man so busy of his class, and yet he seemed much busier than he was. All cases and all judgments could he cite, that from King William's time were apposite, and he could draw a contract so explicit, not any man could fault therefrom illicit, and every statute he'd verbatim quote. He rode but badly in a medley coat, belted in a silken sash with little bars, but of his dress no more particulars. There was a franklin in his company, white was his beard, as is the white daisy. Of sanguine temperament by every sign, he loved right well his morning sop in wine. Delightful living was the goal he'd won, for he was Epicurus's very son, that held opinion that a full delight was true felicity, perfect and right. A householder, and that a great was he. St. Julian he was in his own country. His bread and ale were always right well done. A man with better cellars there was none. Baked meat was never wanting in his house, of fish and flesh, and that so plenteous, it seemed to snow therein both food and drink, of every dainty that a man could think. According to the season of the year, he changed his diet and his means of cheer. Full many a fattened partridge did he mew, and many a bream and pike and fish pond too. Woe to his cook, except the sauces were poignant and sharp, and ready all his gear. His table, waiting in his hallway, stood ready covered throughout the livelong day. At country sessions was he lord and sire, and often acted as a knight of shire. A dagger and a trinket bag of silk hung from his girdle, white as morning milk. He had been sheriff and been auditor, and nowhere was a worthier vavasor, a haberdasher and a carpenter, an arras maker, dyer, and weaver, were with us, clothed in similar livery, all of one sober, great fraternity. Their gear was new, and well adorned it was. Their weapons were not cheaply trimmed with brass, but all with silver, chastely made and well. Their girdles and their pouches too, I tell. Each man of them appeared a proper burgess, to sit in Guildhall on a high dais, and each of them, for wisdom he could span, was fitted to have been an alderman. For chattels they'd enough, and two of rent, to which their good wives gave a free assent, or else for certain they had been to blame. It's good to hear madam before one's name, and go to church when all the world may see, having one's mantle borne right royally. A cook they had with them, just for the nonce, to boil the chickens with the marrow bones, and flavour tartly, and with gallingale. Well could he tell a draught of London ale, and he could roast and seethe and broil and fry, and make a good thick soup and bake a pie. But very ill it was, it seemed to me, that on his shin a deadly sore had he. For sweet blancmange he made it with the best. There was a sailor living far out west. For aught I know, he was of Dartmouth town. He sadly rode a hackney in a gown of thick rough cloth falling to the knee. A dagger hanging on a cord had he, about his neck and under arm and down. The summer's heat had burned his visage brown, and certainly he was a good fellow. Full many a draught of wine he drawn, I trow, of Bordeaux vintage, while the traitor slept. Nice conscience was a thing he never kept. If that he fought and got the upper hand, by water he sent them home to every land. But as for craft, to reckon well his tides, his currents and the dangerous water sides, his harbours and his moon, his pilotage, there was none such from Hull to far Carthage. Hardly and wise in all things undertaken, by many a tempest had his beard been shaken. He knew well all the havens as they were, from Scotland to the Cape of Finisterre, and every creek in Brittany and Spain. His vessel had been christened Madeleine. With us there was a doctor of physic. In all this world was none like him to pick, for talk of medicine and surgery, for he was grounded in astronomy. He often kept a patient from the ball, by horoscopes and magical natural. Well could he tell the fortune ascendant within the houses for his sick patient. He knew the cause of every malady, were it of hot or cold, of moist or dry, and where engendered, and of what humour. He was a very good practitioner. The cause being known down to the deepest root, anon he gave to the sick man his boot. Ready he was with his apothecaries to send him drugs and all electuaries. By mutual aid much gold they'd always won. Their friendship was a thing not new begun. Well ready was he in Aesculapius, and Dioscorides, and in Rufus, Hippocrates, and Hali, and Galen, Serapion, Rhasis, and Avicen, Averroes, Gilbert, and Constantine, Bernard, and Gaddesden, and John Damascene. In diet he was measured as could be, including naught of superfluity. But nourishing and easy, it's no libel to say he read but little in the Bible. In blue and scarlet he went clad withal, lined with the taffeta and with sindal, and yet he was right chary of expense. He kept the gold he gained from pestle, she bettered those of Ypres and even of Ghent. In all the parish there was no good wife should offering make before her on my life, and if one did indeed, so wroth was she, it put her out of all her charity. Her kerchiefs were as fine as weave and ground. I dare say that they weighed a full 10 pound, which of a Sunday she wore on her head. Her hose were of the choicest scarlet red, close gartered, and her shoes were soft and new. Bold was her face, and fair, and red of hue. She'd been respectable throughout her life, with 5 churched husbands bringing joy and strife, not counting other company in youth. But therefore there's no need to speak in truth. 3 times she'd journeyed to Jerusalem, and many a foreign stream she'd had to stem. At Rome she'd been, and she'd been to Boulogne, in Spain at Santiago, and at Cologne. She could tell much of wandering by the way. Cap-toothed was she, it is no lie to say. Upon an ampler easily she sat, well-wimpled eye, and over all a hat, as broad as is a buckler or a targe. A rug was tucked around her buttocks large, and on her feet a pair of sharpened spurs. In company well could she laugh her slurs. The remedies of love she knew, perchance, for of all that art she'd learned the old dance. There was a good man of religion too, a country parson, poor, I warrant you. But rich he was in holy thought and work. He was a learned man also, a clerk, who Christ's own gospel truly sought to preach. Devoutly his parishioners would he teach. Benign he was, and wondrous diligent, patient in adverse times, and well content. As he was oft times proven, always blithe, he was right loath to curse to get a tithe. But rather would he give, in case of doubt, unto those poor parishioners about part of his income, even of his goods. Enough with little colored all his moods. Wide was his parish, houses far asunder, but never did he fail, for rain or thunder, in sickness or in sin or any state, to visit to the farthest small and great, going afoot, and in his hand a stave. This fine example to his flock he gave, that first he wrought, and afterwards he taught. Out of the gospel then that text he caught, and this figure he added thereunto, that if gold rust, what shall poor iron do? For if the priest be foul in whom we trust, what wonder if a layman yield to lust? And shame it is if priests take thought for keep, a shitty shepherd, shepherding clean sheep. Well ought a priest example good to give, by his own cleanness, how his flock should live. He never let his benefice for hire, leaving his flock to flounder in the mire, and ran to London up to old St. Paul's, to get himself a chantry there for souls. Nor in some brotherhood did he withhold, but dwelt at home and kept so well the fold, that never wolf could make his plans miscarry. He was a shepherd and not mercenary, and holy though he was and virtuous, to sinners he was not impietous, nor haughty in his speech, nor too divine, but in all teaching prudent and benign, to lead folk into heaven but by stress. Of good example was his busyness. But if sinful one proved obstinate, be who it might, of high or low estate, him he reproved, and sharply as I know, there is nowhere a better priest, I trow. He had no thirst for pomp or reverence, nor made himself a special spiced conscience. But Christ's own lore and his apostles 12 he taught, but first he followed it himself. With him there was a ploughman, was his brother, that many a load of dung and many another had scattered for good true toiler he, living in peace and perfect charity. He loved God most, and that with his whole heart, at all times, though he played or plied his art, and next his neighbor even as himself. He'd thresh and dig, with never and by stuff he'd sell. In a tabard he rode upon a mare. There were also a reeve and miller there, a summoner, manciple, and pardoner, and then, beside myself, made all there were. The miller was a stout churl, be it known, hardy and big of brawn and big of bone, which was well proved, for when he had went on lamb, at wrestling never found he of the ram. He was a chunky fellow, broad of build. He'd heave a door from hinges if he willed, or break it through by running with his head. His beard, as any sow or fox, was red, and broad it was as if it were a spade. Upon the coping of his nose he had a wart, and thereon stood a tuft of hairs, red as the bristles in an old sow's ears. His nostrils, they were black and very wide. A sword and buckler bore he by his side. His mouth was like a furnace door for size. He was a jester and could poetize, but mostly all of sin and ribaldries. He could steal corn in full thrice charges his fees, and yet he had a thumb of gold, begad. A white coat and blue hood he wore, this lad. A bagpipe he could blow well, be it known, and with that same he brought us out of town. There was a manciple from an inn of court, to whom all buyers might quite well resort, to learn the art of buying food and drink, for whether he paid cash or not, I think, that he so knew the markets when to buy, he never found himself left high and dry. Now it is not a god of full fair grace, that such a vulgar man has wit to pace the wisdom of a crowd of learned men. Of masters had he more than 3 times 10, who were in law expert and curious, whereof there were a dozen in that house, fit to be stewards of both rent and land, of any lord in England who would stand upon his own and live in manner good, in honor debtless, save his head were wood, or live as frugally as he might desire. These men were able to have help to shire in any case that ever might befall, and yet this manciple outguessed them all. The reeve was a slender, choleric man, who shaved his beard as close as razor can. His hair was cut round even with his ears. His top was tonsured like a pulpiteer's. Long were his legs, and they were very lean, and like a staff, with no calf to be seen. Well could he manage granary and bin, no auditor could ever on him win. He could foretell by drought and by the rain the yielding of his seed and of his grain. His lord sheep and his oxen and his dairy, his swine and horses, all his stores, his poultry, were wholly in the steward's managing, and by agreement he'd made reckoning, since his young lord of age was 20 years. Yet no man ever found him in arrears. There was no agent, hint, or herd who'd cheat, but he knew well his cunning and deceit. They were afraid of him as of the death. His cottage was a good one, on a heath, by green trees shaded, with his dwelling place, much better than his lord could be purchased. Right rich he was in his own private right, seeing he'd pleased his lord by day or night, by giving him or lending of his goods, and so got thanked, but yet got coats and hoods. In youth he'd learned a good trade, and had been a carpenter as fine as could be seen. The steward set a horse that well could trot, and was all dapple grey, and was named Scott. A long surcoat of blue did he parade, and at his side he bore a rusty blade. Of Norfolk was the reeve of whom I tell, from near a town that men call Badeswell. Bundled he was like friar with chin to croup, and ever he rode hindmost of our troop. A summoner was with us in that place, who had a fiery red cherubic face. For eczema he had, his eyes were narrow, as hot he was, and lecherous as a sparrow. With black and scabby brows and scanty beard, he had a face that little children feared. There was no mercury, sulphur, wax, ceruse, tartar could discharge, nor ointment that could cleanse enough or bite to free him of his boils and pimples white, nor of the bosses resting on his cheeks. Well loved he garlic, onion, eye, and leeks, and drinking of strong wine as red as blood. Then would he walk and shout as madman would, and when a deal of wine he'd poured within, then would he utter no word save Latin. Some phrases he had learned, say 2 or 3, which he had garnered out of some degree. No wonder, for he'd heard it all the day, and all you know right well, that even a jay can call out what as well as can the Pope. But then, for aught else, into him you'd grope. 'Twas found he'd spent his whole philosophy, just quaestio quid juris could he cry. He was a noble rascal, and a kind, a better comrade 'twould be hard to find. Why, he would suffer for a quart of wine some good fellow to have his concubine a 12-month, and excuse him to the full. Between ourselves, though, he could pluck a gull. And if he chanced upon a good fellow, he would instruct him never to have awe, in such a case, of the archdeacon's curse, except a man's soul lie within his purse. For in his purse the man should punished be. The purse is the archdeacon's hell, said he. But well I know he lied in what he said. A curse ought every guilty man to dread, for curse can kill, as absolution save, and wears significavit to the grave. In his own power had he, and at ease, the boys and girls of all the diocese, and knew their secrets, and by counsel led, a garland had set upon his head, large as a tavern's wine bush on a stake. A buckler had he made of bread they bake. With him there rode a gentle partner of Roncesvalles, his friend and his composer. Straight from the court of Rome had journeyed he. Loudly he sang, "Come hither, love, to me." The summoner joining with a burden round, was never horn of half so great a sound. His partner had hair as yellow as wax, but lank it hung as does a strife of flax. In wisps hung down such locks as he'd on head, and with them he his shoulders overspread. But thin they dropped, and stringy one by one, but as to hood, for sport of it, he'd none, though it was packed in wallet all the while. It seemed to him he went in latest style, dishevelled, safer cap, his head all bare, as shiny eyes he had as has a hair. He had a fine veronica sewed to cap. His wallet lay before him in his lap, stuffed full of pardons brought from Rome, all hot. A voice he had that bleated like a goat. No beard had he, nor ever should he have, for smooth his face, and he just had a shave. I think he was a gelding or a mare, but in his craft from Berwick unto Ware, but no such partner in any place. For in his bag he had a pillowcase, the which, he said, was our true lady's veil. He said he had a piece of the very sail that good St. Peter had, what time he went upon the sea, till Jesus changed his bent. He had a Latin cross set full of stones, and in a bottle had he some pig's bones. But with these relics, when he came upon some simple parson, then this paragon, in that one day more money stood to gain than the poor dupe in 2 months could attain. And thus, with flattery and such like japes, he made the parson and the rest his apes. But yet, to tell the whole truth at the last, he was, in church, a fine ecclesiast. Well could he read a lesson or a story, but best of all he sang an offertory. For well he knew that when that song was sung, then might he preach and all with polished tongue, to win some silver, as he right would well could. Therefore he sang so merrily and so loud. Now have I told you briefly, in a clause, the state, the array, the number, and the cause of the assembling of this company in Southwark at this noble hostelry, known as the Tabard Inn, hard by the bell. But now the time is come wherein to tell how all we bore ourselves that very night, when at the hostelry we did alight. And afterward the story I engage to tell you of our common pilgrimage. But first I pray you of your courtesy, you'll not ascribe it to vulgarity, though I speak plainly of this matter here, retailing you with words and means of cheer, nor though I use with very terms nor lie, for this thing do you know as well as I. When one repeats a tale told by a man, he must report as nearly as he can every least word, if he remember it, however rude it be, or how unfit, or else he may be telling what's untrue, embellishing and fictionizing too. He may not spare, although it were his brother, he must as well say one word as another. Christ spoke right broadly out in holy writ, and you know well there's nothing low in it. And Plato says, to those able to read, the word should be the cousin to the deed. Also, I pray that you'll forgive it me, if I have not said folk in their degree. Here in this tale, by rank as they should stand, my wits are not the best, you'll understand. Great cheer our host gave to us every one, and to the supper set us all anon, and served us then with victuals of the best. Strong was the wine, and pleasant to each guest. A seemly man our good host was, withal, fit to have been a marshal in some hall. He was a large man with protruding eyes, as fine a burgher as in Cheapside lies, bold in his speech, and wise, and right well taught, and as to manhood lacking there in naught. Also he was a very merry man, and after meat at plain he began, speaking of mirth among some other things, when all of us had paid our reckonings, and saying thus, now masters, verily, you're all welcome here, and heartily, for by my truth, and telling you no lie, I have not seen this year a company, here in this inn, fitter for sport than now. Fain would I make you happy, knew I how, and of a game have I this moment thought, to give you joy, and it shall cost you naught. You go to Canterbury, may God speed, and the blessed martyr soon requite your meed. And well I know, as you go on your way, you'll tell good tales, and shape yourselves to play. For truly there's no mirth nor comfort none, riding the roads as dumb as is a stone. And therefore will I furnish you a sport, as I just said, to give you some comfort. And if you like it all by one assent, and will be ruled by me of my judgment, and will so do as I'll proceed to say, tomorrow, when you ride upon your way, then by my father's spirit, who is dead, if you're not gay, I'll give you up my head. Hold up your hands, nor more about it speak. Our full assenting was not far to seek. We thought there was no reason to think twice, and granted him his way without advice, and bade him well his verdict just and wise. Masters, quoth he, here now is my advice, but take it not, I pray you, in disdain. This is the point, to put it short and plain, that each of you, beguiling the long day, shall tell 2 stories as you went your way to Canterbury town, and each of you, on coming home, shall tell another 2, all the adventures he has known befall. And he who plays his part the best of all, that is to say, who tells upon the road tales of best sins in most amusing mode, shall have a supper at the other's cost, here in this room, and sitting by this post. When we come back again from Canterbury, and now, the more to warrant you'll be merry, I will myself and gladly with you ride, at my own cost, and I will be your guide. But whosoever shall my rule gainsay, shall pay for all that's bought along the way, and if you are agreed that it be so, tell me at once, or if not, tell me no, and I will act accordingly, no more. This thing was granted, and our oaths we swore, with right glad hearts, and prayed of him also, that he should take the office, nor persuasive governor of all of us, judging our tales, and by his wisdom thus arranged that supper at a certain price, we to be ruled each one by his advice, in things both great and small, by one assent, we stood committed to his government. And thereupon the wine was fetched anon. We drank, and then to rest went every one, and that without a longer tarrying. Next morning, when the day began to spring, uprose our host, and acting as our cock, he gathered us together in a flock, and forth we rode, a jog-trot being the pace, until we reached St. Thomas's watering place. And there our host pulled horse up to a walk, and said, Now, masters, listen while I talk. You know what you agreed at set of sun. If evensong and morning song are one, let's here decide who first shall tell a tale. And as I hope to drink more wine and ale, who proves rebel to my government, shall pay for all that by the way is spent. Come now, draw cuts before we farther win, and he that draws the shortest shall begin. Sir knight, said he, my master and my lord, you shall draw first, as you have pledged your word. Come near, quoth he, my lady prioress, and you, sir clerk, but by your bashfulness, nor ponder more, out hands flow every man. At once to draw a cut each one began, and to make short the matter, as it was, whether by chance or whatsoever cause, the truth is that the cut fell to the knight, at which right happy then was every wight. Thus that his story first of all he'd tell, according to the compact it befell, as you have heard. Why argue to and fro? And when this good man saw that it was so, being a wise man and obedient,